Hello, welcome back to this Phantasy Star 4 playthrough. Well, it's been a fair bit too long since my last video. I have a couple of explanations for that. One is that I'd been preparing for that new Brigandine game for the Switch. I am very fond of that series, as I explained in another video. And the other reason is that I know exactly what I'm walking into, and it terrifies me. After my Ring of Red series, which lasted way too long and had much worse problems than this series did, believe it or not, I made it a policy to never, ever make a full playthrough of a game that I hadn't already played all the way through beforehand, at least once, preferably twice. So why the problem with this? Well, it has to do with the different strategy I'm using here, with minimizing grinding. Even though in the very one episode ago I talked about how easy this game was. And I was still that unsure about this, but that's because the air castle... it's a very particular flavor of dungeon. The part that you're going to see this episode is actually the more mild part of it. But it should still give you an idea of what we're looking at here. And of course there's air on it. It's called the air castle. So what was this place's role in Phantasy Star 1? Because, I mean, it has Phantasy Star 1 music, and very rightfully so. Well, finding out the existence of, the location of, and the methods to access the air castle are the point of almost all of the game. The reason for that is because the person on it, Lashiek, was the main focus of Alice's revenge. At the time of Phantasy Star 1, he was King Lashiek. And the person who, among other things, directed the policies for the robot cops that Robot Cop killed Alice's brother at the start of the game. Obviously, Lashiek is not a king of anything anymore. Well, perhaps except this castle right here. But getting to him was a long and involved process. There were several things that you had to do. One is you had to track down the item that allows you to transform your companion Meow into something that can carry you to the air castle. You also need to pick up an item that'll help protect you from Lashiek's attacks. And you need a good launching platform to reach the air castle once you have all of the rest of that set up, which is a fairly lengthy monster-filled tower. And then you had to travel through the air castle to the boss and kill him, the boss being Lashiek, of course. Although, in the Western version, thanks to either translation issues or character limit issues, he was called King Lassic. Now, there are some problems that I have to deal with here. One is that Chaz is not using the best weapon for this. The Laconia shop in Jut sells Laconia swords, which are definitely better than what I have right now. But I don't have enough money for one. That's one of the costs of the minimum grinding approach. So I just gotta deal with it. Oh, it's worth noting that once you accomplish all of these prerequisites and reach King Lashiek, the fight is not all that difficult. This was a game where random encounters were definitely the most important thing. to the point that an item that when used allowed you to instantly escape a battle is very important for the endgame. Not just because the monsters are tough and can consume a lot of your resources when they hit you, but because just through normal play you would reach a point wherein level ups had no effect on you at all, so you didn't actually gain anything from fighting monsters. Now, both this particular situation and the item involved are not present in Phantasy Star 4. I guarantee you that in the final dungeon of the game, I will not be running away from monsters. At least, I don't think I will. As far as the layout goes for this particular place, well, I'll put it to you this way. When I looked at a map of the whole thing, I got a bit of a headache. There were a lot of different connections between the hub castle area and other rooms, and it was not all intuitive. By the way, these guys, they are very dangerous. That third thing you saw, that, yes, it is called Death Spell, and yes, the reason it's called that is because it will kill you. I was a little bit lucky there. And for that reason, I will always use a Disrupt when I encounter 3 of these in an encounter. The reason it works is, while these ghosts resist a lot of things, Chaz damage is not one of them, and Disrupt carries her claw's Chaz damage along with it. The problem is my uses of Disrupt are limited, which kind of puts a soft cap on how long I can keep fighting the encounters around here. Without that Disrupt, it becomes a lot more difficult to deal with these ghosts, because they resist most kinds of attacks. Fortunately not laser attacks, but fire, physical, water, I think. And since they hit pretty hard with corrosion and carry a lot of risk with Death Spell, I really want to minimize my contact with those things. Also of note is that you can get ambushed a lot here, that is, when monsters get a free round of combat. This was actually more pronounced in a practice run where I got pretty badly lost. I think I got around 5 or 6 ambushes in a row in that run. It was pretty ugly. Also, this dungeon carries a layout which is a bit of a weakness for Kyra, actually. In particular, most of the monsters in here resist fire, and while Kyra has Foy and Flaelai and Gra, she does not have any of the Watt techniques, which is a bit of a problem, especially since there's, well, the enemies hit hard enough that I do not feel comfortable giving Kyra slashers. This, however, does not make Kyra useless for the dungeon in general, because it is very important to have a dedicated healer character for this. If it were, say, Rika healing everything on her own, I'd run out of resources pretty quickly. Now, one of the problems that I encountered in dealing with this particular dungeon is... Well, before I get into that, let's talk about these dimension worms. They're fairly unusual in how they work. They resist almost everything. The 2 things that they don't seem to resist are Chaz damage, because of course that works on everything, and also gravity techniques, which is a little counterintuitive because they will use Gra on you. And traditional JRP logic says if an enemy does something to you, don't do that same thing back to them because they resist it at best. But that's not how this one works. And when you do hit with something that can actually damage them, they die in one hit, without exception. The problem with that is that Gra, even at its lowest level, is not a particularly cheap spell or technique to use. So running into 10 such encounters will, for example, cut Rune's technique point reserve in half. And I'm going to need at least a portion of that for later. And it should say something about a dungeon when it threatens even Rune's resources for blasting stuff. Most of the treasure chests in here don't give anything of real consequences, but the Swift Helm... I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The Swift Helm is an exception. As far as I can tell, only Chaz can use it, but he really needed the boost both in defense and in agility. He does have a lowered mental stat, I think because the previous helmet boosted it a bit, but a decrease of 2 points of mental is not a big deal. I mean, you've seen that's about a 3-point difference in damage when it comes to techniques. And I do not consider that to be significant. Honestly, it wouldn't even be that significant at the very start of the game, never mind now. Going back a few steps, it was about distractions, which is appropriate enough, especially because it's distractions by random encounters. When dealing with branching corridors and an encounter shows up where you have to give it some consideration, I have run into the problem where I forget which direction I'm supposed to go. I feel like that escape pipe is a suggestion of some sort. Also, I kind of appreciate how they have the music kind of pick back up midway after an encounter. I can't recall off the top of my head if any other tracks do that in this game. I take that as a sign that the developers knew exactly how long people would be wandering through this dungeon in particular. Also, please forgive my slowness in setting this new macro. I don't know, I kind of forgot the finer points of setting up a good macro. Also, on the suggestion of one of my readers, setting a recovery skill in there is... For random encounters, it can be a little iffy because you're not always hurt at the time it goes off, although given in this dungeon enemies tend to be faster than I am, it's a fairly sure thing. The thing about doing that is that the computer will automatically target it for you, and they will target the person with the lowest health. That's not always the person in the greatest need of healing, but it's often enough that you can safely do something like that. As for that macro that I just set up, don't worry, you'll see it in action later on. We are reaching the halfway mark for Midis, which is a little concerning. One of the nice things about Kyra is that as a healer you can sort of conserve Midis because her mental stat, while not rune level, is good enough to make a pretty strong res, which is dirt cheap technique point wise, and you can use that to patch up moderate strength hits wherein you don't want to leave them as they are in case there's an enemy ambush, but you don't want to waste a Midis on it either. And that's very helpful for conserving resources. Ooh, there are a lot of places like that in this castle. But that's by no means the worst of it when it comes to navigating this place. There are a couple of fairly long side passages that you take to get treasure chests, and they can look like the main way forward. And even that's not the worst thing, though. I don't know if this game has particular encounter rates for specific dungeons, but my untested gut feeling says it's a bit higher in the air castle than in most other places. It might just feel that way because this dungeon is so huge. So, if I've skipped all those other encounters, why am I showing off this one? Well, that's because... that's so you can see my number of remaining disrupts, which is... well, now it's 0. That is a bit of a concern to me. And that's why I decided to switch to slashers, because even though the game doesn't tell you this, they count as laser weapons, so they can actually hurt those specters decently well. And I'm going to need to hit those as hard as I possibly can. Looking back on it, I might have been able to get away with having her use slashers throughout the entirety of the dungeon, and having her be able to normally attack enemies that resist fire could have been fairly helpful. But given some of the hits that I've taken in this dungeon, even knowing what I know now, I'm still not all that comfortable. And guess what I have to deal with very soon after I run out of disrupts? So how do I handle this? Well, I think I can use crosscuts safely here because Chaz has better tools for dealing with bosses, and I can't think of anything else at his disposal that would work very well here. I say that like I'm trash-talking crosscut, but it actually works just fine. You may have also noticed in the videos where or the battles that I showed where I did use Disrupt, Rika did not move first, even though her agility is better than the other characters. That's because this game has a turn order randomizing system that punishes your ability to plan for things when the enemy is faster than you. Which is to say, the size of the randomizer is determined by the fastest creature or character in the battle, And when that is a monster, it means that your ability to choose your party order outside of macros is greatly reduced. You especially have a lower chance of, for example, lucking out and moving faster than the monster does. At least I think that's how it works. I know that the modifier is half of the agility of the fastest thing in the battle. So, Zeathul seems like a good target for wide area attacks, right? Well, yes and no. If you know what you're doing, if you can pick really strong combination attacks, they are definitely worth using. I do not actually have a whole lot of those. As for why I don't... Well, okay, I'm out of Disrupt, but why I wouldn't use that if I had access to it, well, give it a turn or two. I also mentioned in the comments of one of my earlier videos... Ouch. That rocket barrages are kind of a joint effort between robots and wizards. So let's show that off, shall we? Maybe I should show off the normal use of Burst Rocket at some point. The thing is, why would I? Well, okay, just to show off what it looks like. I'll do it in some side encounter after I'm done with the air castle, probably. Anyway, that combination attack that the enemy used is something they only do if you hit them with a wide area attack. But it does consume their turns, so I don't know if I'd exactly call it a counter move in the traditional sense of it. Even so, that counter attack hits hard enough that you want to use something really good to hit all three of them at once. That being said, when you eliminate one of them, they lose access to it, so hitting them both with something is just fine at this point. I should definitely be using Githu, by the way. I don't know why I forgot about that. It seems like a fairly important thing to do in boss battles. Although once the first enemy is removed, the rest of the fight is a fair bit easier, so I guess I shouldn't worry too much. Looking back on it, I'm fairly lucky that 2 or 3 of them didn't use Gizan on the same turn. That would have caused very serious problems. Excuse me. Also, the Silver Tusk turns Rika into a fairly potent boss killer. That being said, I'd probably have to keep her on healing duty if Kyra wasn't here. Now, I'd like to emphasize, everything that I've done so far in this video is just to open the door to the main part of the dungeon. And we're already approaching the half-hour mark. So yeah, this is a 2-part dungeon. And Ephes! Ephes is a... well, that is not a skill that will go out of date, let's put it that way. It's a party-wide holy attack. And considering that I just went to the macro screen... You can probably figure out the other benefit, just in case having a powerful holy attack was not, strong enough on its own. But since I just learned it, EFS is a once per dungeon skill, so you're not going to see that one just yet. Now, both of the doorways that are blocked lead towards the next part of the dungeon, but the first one is kind of a shortcut to the center where the second Guardian Field is, so getting back there from the entrance will be no problem. Still, at the time of playing this, I was not so confident in my gameplay that I want to go through the second part without saving first. So let's just do some interplanetary travel for that, shall we? And next time, we'll find out what is in the next part of the dungeon, the context that it's in, and why I'm so scared of it. I'll see you then.